Hello, and welcome to this DHPSNY webinar titled Making Your Website Accessible. My name is Laura Montgomery, and I'm a archivist in the Digital Strategies program at the New York State Archives. This webinar is a basic, non-comprehensive presentation on web accessibility and the usability practices with a focus for content creators structuring their web page content. This presentation isn't necessarily focused for web designers or developers, so we won't go too much into practices of using minimalist HTML code that structures website content or CSS, which applies styling to that code for different audiences and devices. There are a few HTML tags used in the examples, but those are for more explanatory purposes than anything else. There's also some images used in this presentation, and I will try to describe them as best I can within the context of the slides that they are on. When I use the term content creator in this context, I'm referring to anyone who uses a digital device, computers, tablets, smartphones, etc., to create content such as words, images, and audio and video for a website or a web page. The practices, tools, and resources identified in this presentation are by no means an exhaustive list. It's what I've found along the way to be helpful in my web accessibility and usability journey. By the end of this presentation, you'll be able to have a basic understanding of some definitions that will provide some context for making your website accessible. You'll know a few of the laws and guidelines that guide accessibility best practices and gain an understanding of the benefits of accessible design and why it's important. You will be able to learn more about assistive technologies and how they will interact with a website, basic accessibility and usability practices that may be familiar or new depending on where you are in your own web content journey. And finally, I'll introduce some accessibility testing tools and resources that can help you on your own to measure the accessible nature of your website. So let's start the presentation by anchoring ourselves in a few definitions. This will assist us going forward because sometimes these terms can have different meanings in different contexts. The definitions we're going to go over today are focused on access, accessibility, web accessibility, and usability. So I'd like to start off with the definition of access because access and accessibility are often used interchangeably. This definition of access comes from SAA's Glossary of Archival Records and Terminology. In this context, access is the ability to locate relevant information using catalogs, indexes, finding aids, and other tools. So accessibility, on the other hand, would involve how we would use these tools. And this definition comes from the Interactive Design Foundation, which is accessibility is the concept that a product or service can be used by everyone regardless of how they encounter it. Moving towards web accessibility, this definition overlaps with usability design principles, and this definition comes from Wikipedia and really focuses in on the different types of accessibility needed with websites. Web accessibility, for the purposes of this presentation, is the inclusive practice of ensuring that there are no barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites on the World Wide Web by people with disabilities, situational disabilities, and socioeconomic restrictions on the bandwidth and speed. Usability focuses more on the general user experience, which can include accessibility, but the emphasis is on whether the design is effective and satisfying to use. This definition is an official ISO definition of usability, which is usability is the extent to which a product can be used by specific users to achieve specific goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specified context of use. Accessibility, on the other hand, is concerned with whether all users are able to access an equivalent user experience, however they encounter a product or a service. So who benefits from accessible web design? Everyone benefits from logically organized content, intuitive navigation, and image, audio, or video-based content and supports that fit within the context of the web pages and the website. Users who have disabilities, impairments, or challenges benefit from accessible web design. The US Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 1 in 4 US adults lives with a disability. There are many different types of disabilities, impairments, and challenges that can lead to people needing more accessible web design. Visual, such as blindness, low vision, color blindness, auditory, including deafness or hard of hearing, motor, physical, including inability or difficulty using a standard mouse or keyboard, or slow response time, or limited with fine motor control. Cognitive and neurological would include learning disabilities, distractibility, inability to remember or focus on large amounts of information. Addressing the web content to meet the needs of each disability or impairment or challenge requires a content design strategy which promotes overall usability beyond people with these disabilities. Accessibility is not confined to the list of the above disabilities, impairments, or challenges. Rather, it extends to anyone who is experiencing any permanent, temporary, or situational disability. Users who have situational or environmental impairments or challenges also benefit from accessible and usable design. For example, screen size. People using smartphones, mobile phones, smartwatches, smart TVs, and other devices with small screens, different input modes, etc., will experience a website differently than a user using a laptop or a desktop. Pew Research Center reports that 15% of folks aged 18 to 29 depend on smartphones for online access, and 10% of Americans rely on a mobile device as their only form of high-speed internet. So keep in mind that not everyone is accessing your website through a desktop computer or a laptop, and the content you create needs to be flexible enough to be accessed on alternative devices. Limited bandwidth and slow internet connections would be a situational or environmental challenge for people living in developing countries or rural areas. People with situational limitations, such as bright sunlight or an environment where they cannot listen to audio, would benefit from captioned video or transcriptions for audio content. There are also skills barriers for accessing the internet, such as digital literacy skills, and users having varying levels of literacy skills in general. Most homepages of websites would need to be written at a 5th grade reading level to accommodate all users, and other website content should be written between an 8th grade or 11th grade reading level, depending on the type of content. There are also scheduling barriers that can prevent access to web content. As our world has gone more online in the past few years, there are a lot of Zoom meetings, webinars, talks, events, etc., that are hosted online rather than in person, and not everyone can attend these events as they can happen. A way to lessen scheduling barriers is to have an accessible recording of the meeting or talk available on the website after the event. And web accessibility benefits content creators, organizations, etc. It avoids discrimination, legal complaints, and enhances the public image of your organization. It can improve the usability for all users, folks who are developing their language skills, those who are accessing a website via older technologies, people who access a website on different web browsers, mobile phones, tablets, or other device, and users in loud or quiet environments. It also makes your website more likely to be found by improving search engine optimization. The goal of search engine optimization, SEO, is to drive more traffic to your content by improving your website's rankings in search engines such as Google, and providing closed captions and transcripts for your content, and a shared goal of web accessibility and CEO. And you will reach a wider audience with a more usable and accessible website. Assistive technologies also help drive accessibility and usability of websites. There are alternative keyboards or switches. There are screen reader softwares which can read out and navigate a website. screen magnification software, which can enlarge what is displayed on the computer monitor, making it easier to read for vision impaired users. Speech recognition software that can accept spoken word commands to the computer or turn dictation into grammatically correct text are useful to those who have difficulty using a mouse or keyboard. You can also navigate through a website using the tab key on your keyboard. There are also text browsers, visual notifications, and other types of voice browsers. Here are some laws and standards that impact the accessibility practices. However, we are not going to go over them because it is out of scope with this presentation. Just know that they exist and that they are instrumental to current accessibility practices. There is the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA, the Rehabilitation Act, sections 405 and nope, I lied. Sections 504 and 508 and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We are going to go more in depth with web accessibility guidelines. The guidelines are the basis for a lot of the accessibility laws in the world and are based on 4 basic ideas of perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust web content. Perceivable in the sense that it is available to the senses, vision and hearing primarily either through browsers or through assistive technologies such as screen readers or screen enlargers. Operable for users who can interact with all the controls and interactive elements using a mouse, keyboard, or assistive device. Understandable in that the content is clear and limits the confusion and ambiguity of the content on the web page and the navigation throughout your website. Robust in the sense that a wide range of technologies, including old and new user agents, web browsers, and assistive technologies can access the content. Moving on from the laws and standards, we are now touching base with basic usability design concepts. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list, it's just something to familiarize yourself with. As we go through these concepts, you'll notice a repetition between the concepts and the design practices we'll go over later that implement the concepts themselves. User-centered design should be simple and clean and reflects the needs and interests of the users. It should assist users to carry out their purpose for visiting the website and informs users about resources and services. Understandable content should use simple and concise language. The homepage should be written at a 5th grade reading level, and other sections of the website reading level should vary between 8th and 11th grade. The content should be current, and instructional content should be easy to follow. There should also be a consistent design and functionality throughout the website. Intuitive navigation would mean that it is your content is instinctively discoverable, right? Its findability to someone who hasn't visited the website before should be pretty self-explanatory. There is context-specific navigation, and high-use information should be findable and not hidden to the novice user. Resources and services can be accessed with ease, and graphic and interactive navigation elements employed, such as menus over long lists of links. Fourth, your website should be readable and functional on all devices. Mobile first principles should be used and responsive to screen design. And finally, manageable. Website information architecture is maintained and understood, and the consolidated functionality of the website should be understood to avoid duplicating information. Basic web accessibility design concepts in general are listed on the slide. We will go over most of them in today's session, but there are a lot of concepts that are going to be repeated and iterated again, same as with the usability concepts for the different types of web content we'll be going over later in the session. I won't be going over any information on creating accessible PDFs because it's out of scope for this talk and could easily fill its own separate session. Just know that if a PDF is going to be uploaded to a website, it needs to be accessible. Other basic web accessible design concepts include providing alternative text, captioning video, and providing transcripts for audio content, making PDFs and other downloadable content accessible, not relying on color alone to convey meaning, and structured content should be clear and easy to read. Moving on to the accessibility and usability practices for website content creation, we'll focus on some tips and tricks for web page titles, headings, lists, links, images, tables, charts, and graphs, and audio and video content. So web page titles, what is their purpose? Structurally, web page titles describe the content and the purpose of the rest of the web page. It is also the first item read by a screen reader for users to identify the specific web page that the user is on. Well-formed web page titles are unique, concise, and descriptive. Functionally, web page titles serve as navigation markers for a website and are used in search engines. So if your web page title is well-formed, it will be more findable in search results. Titles are also the default names for bookmarks when a page is bookmarked and is the top-level view of the location a user is in a website within the browser window or the tab. These are some examples of web page titles. These are from the University of Indiana University's Web Accessibility Resource. These are all good web page titles, but some are better than others. For example, web page title titled "Contact Us" is good. However, this title doesn't identify the site or tell us who us is. If the title was changed to Acme Incorporated -Contact Us, it is better. It is a more unique title, but it does not begin with the most specific type of information that a user would need. And in this example, the best version of this web page title is Contact Us -Acme Incorporated. This title is concise, descriptive, likely unique, and identifies the site. It also lists the most specific information first. Headings. Headings improve readability for everyone. Users can scan the web page quickly to understand the content. For efficient navigation, do not use bold instead of a heading. It may look correct, but the underlying code is not set correctly, so a screen reader will not be able to read and interpret that bold text as a heading. Same thing as if you're trying to use italics. Also, bold text can look like a link on a web page, which can be confusing to users who also aren't using assistive technology and are visiting the website for the first time. Headings give users an adaptive technology a sense of structure to understand and navigate. Without headings, a web page is difficult to navigate and read because the web page could just look like one big long block of text. Here is an example of heading structures. You would not want to skip heading levels to be more specific when going hierarchically down from the largest heading size to the smallest. So from like an H2 heading to an H5 heading, you would need to stick an H3 and 4 in between the two. And the H1, H2, H3 are heading tags. However, you can skip in the other direction from the smallest heading size, so an H5 to an H2, and increasing in larger size. Do not select heading levels based on appearance alone because they do serve a function. Select based on the heading hierarchy in your web page. In general, you shouldn't need to use more than an H3, and headings shouldn't be overused in your web page. Using heading levels 4, 5, and 6 would indicate subsections, and headings on a well-designed web page will form an outline of the page content. So for example, H1 heading would be like a page title or the main topic on a web page, and H2 would be a main section of the web page, and an H3 heading would be a subsection of the main section on the web page. Lists. Lists increase readability, introduce key concepts, and meaningfully organize information. They convey sequencing such as step 1, 2, 3, etc., and can link to additional information. Formatted correctly, lists can greatly increase the scanning ability of a cited user and of adaptive technologies. Users are able to comprehend text more quickly than reading through a wall of text. Ordered lists are numbered lists and would be used for related items with a meaningful sequence, such as steps or instructions. Unordered or bulleted lists would be used for items that have no particular order. Here is an example of the differences between no list, unordered list, and ordered list. On the left, we have a no list structure. In the middle, we have an unordered list structure. And on the right, we have an ordered list structure. See the difference in readability between the no list and the unordered list for creating a list of items. The unordered list is easier to scan than the block of text in the left-hand column. Again, using this example, see the differences between the unordered list and the ordered list and how they serve different functions for this grocery list and grocery store task scenario. The unordered list lists items on a grocery list that do not require a particular sequence, whereas the ordered list of how to shop for groceries requires a sequence for the set of directions provided. Descriptive links need to convey the function and purpose of a link and the use of a unique link text. The link text needs to make sense without the surrounding sentences or context. Don't use the phrase click here or read more, as they give no indication where they would bring the user for purposes of navigation. Well-formed descriptive links helps both cited users and users who use adaptive technology. Cited users will scan web pages for links, and screen readers can perform a similar function too. Additionally, it'll help users make well-informed decisions about the content that links will take them to. Duplicate links can lead users to wonder whether both instances point to the same resource. Duplicating links can significantly increase the number of links on a page through which a screen reader and keyboard-only navigation users must navigate through. On this slide, we have examples of descriptive links. On the left-hand column, we have a few examples of unclear link text, and in the right-hand column, we have some clear examples for the same types of links. For an unclear link example, the link for click here for instructions and how to use this web resource, the link itself is a little unclear. A clearer version of the same text would be the link titled being instructions for the new web resource would be the link are available online. Another example, learn about images and accessibility here and here could be changed to learn about accessible images in alt text. Making your website accessible, register for the workshop would be unclear. What are you registering for? Whereas if you had a link where the text making your website accessible is the linked text instead of register, the user would understand what workshop they are registering for. Same thing with workshop handouts, PDF, Word. If PDF and Word are the only things that are highlighted as a link, what is that directing the user to? If it's changed to having the entire block of text as a link, it makes it easier to understand that it's the workshop handout in PDF form or the workshop handout in Word that is where the user is going to be directed to. With the last example, visit, and then the entire URL is typed out for more information. That's difficult to read for both sighted users and users using assistive technology. When you are using a link, especially out of a website, just use the page title of the page that you're linking to. So a clearer link example on the right would be visit the workshop catalog for more information. Also notice the color contrast for the links, the fact that they are underlined, and when you hover over them, it identifies the destination. So for example, I'm going to move my mouse over to the click here. You see that there is a contrast between the blue and the black text. The link is underlined, and when you hover over, it tells you the destination that the user is going to be brought to. In this instance, the destination is to Google. These are structurally well-formed links. Ignore the fact that they all point to Google, but just absorb the fact that the mouse hovers over them and it identifies the destination for the link. Moving on to image links. Avoid using images as links. If you have to use images as links, treat the image link as a link and not an image. The alt text needs to convey the location and purpose of the link. Do not include link to or click to in the alt text, and avoid making the links look like buttons. Buttons and links have different functions. Buttons are used to submit a form, whereas a link would take a user to another web page. If you're going to use an image as a link, then consistently use it throughout the website, such as a logo image would always take the user to the same destination, for example, the home page. Moving on to images. Images should be informative and purposeful within the context of the web page, keeping color and contrast in mind, as well as size and resolution. Images can engage and persuade users, guide them to main points, illustrate concepts, reduce complexity, and show patterns in data. Use an image to reduce the complexity of text and make it as simple as you can without sacrificing meaning. Do not reuse a small image, such as one you found on the web, at larger sizes because the appearance may be fuzzy. If the image is of a small amount of text, the alt text must match the text in the image exactly. If the image contains a considerable amount of text, the text should also be somewhere else on the web page. Images of text are best reserved for when a particular visual presentation is essential, such as a logo. On the right-hand side of this slide is an image of Central Park in New York City, and below this image is the image and the image tag and the image alt tag for the park. So the image tag references the file, the alt tag where it says ALT equals aerial view of Central Park in New York City is the alt text for the image. Alternative text for images. Users rely on these descriptions to understand the meaning and context of any visual content on the website. Alt text should be brief, less than 250 characters. It should identify the purpose of the image, not the description. It should also include any visible text in an image. Avoid using the phrase image of or similar language. Most users will be aware that an image is on the web page through the visual observation or adaptive technology. It is more important to keep the alt text short and brief with a minimal description. The alt text is read by Assistive Technologies. It helps users access your webcon easier, especially for visually impaired users, users who have disabled image loading, and users encountering broken images will be able to understand what the image is meant to convey. So the example on the right-hand side of the screen now is of a broken image, but it does have well-formed image alt text. So if a user happened to come to this website and saw this broken image, they'd be able to have a sense of what this image is because of the alt text. And the alt text reads, "Tourists pose for pictures while touching the foot of the John Harvard statue." This is an example from Harvard's digital accessibility webpage. Tables, charts, and graphs are used to display data. They shouldn't be used to style or lay out content. Alt text may not be enough to describe a table, chart, or graph image, and the information should be provided in addition on the web page to give a context for the table, chart, or graph being used. The table on the right-hand side of the screen is an example taken from Penn State's charts accessibility webpage, and there are a lot of good and bad examples on that webpage of well-formed accessibility layouts for tables, charts, and graphs. Moving on to audio and video accessibility with captioning. Pre-recorded and live captions are available, and automated captioning is available too, especially if you host your content on YouTube. They have automated captioning available. It might not be the best captioning available, so you may need to do some quality control and read through and possibly edit the captions on the video. Captions are synchronized to appear approximately at the same time as the corresponding audio, and it is equivalent to the spoken words and other audio information that is on the screen at the same time. Captions should be readily available to users. If they aren't automatic, then they should be intuitive to a user on how to turn them on. Benefits of captioning includes users with hearing loss or impairments, non-native speakers viewing the content, users in noisy environment, and users with learning disabilities. With captioning, there should also be a control involved in your play device so users can stop, play, and pause content, and no automatic content should be playing when a page loads. The example on the right-hand side of the screen is a captioned screenshot of the movie Avatar, where a character is speaking a line of dialogue, and the dialogue is captioned at the bottom of the screenshot. Transcripts are separate files, whereas captions play simultaneously with audio content. Transcripts are also different than captions in that they can be searchable by a user or search engine. The example on the right-hand side of the screen is the transcript for a podcast of the Pop Culture Happy Hour. It includes the spoken words in the podcast. It also includes the speaker info and relevant sounds to the context of the audio. Audio description is in order for video content to be accessible to people who are not able to see it. Audio description can be available. The audio description will describe the content to a user who is not able to see the video at the time. It is a spoken track that plays simultaneously while the movie or show or video content is playing, The example on the right-hand side of the screen is a screenshot of the silent film Nosferatu, and the accompanying audio description is on the left-hand side of the screen. So against a bare wall in the Harker residence, the shadow of a railing and a hunched figure of Nosferatu scaling the stairs, his claw-like hands outstretched. So moving on to accessibility testing, we've gone through some practices for accessibility content creation, and you'll want to know if your content you're creating is accessible. There are a variety of tools and methods for testing your content or your website to check if it is accessible to use. Accessibility testing can be helpful in evaluating a website, flagging issues, and providing solutions. There are 3 general types of tools for testing, including automated tools, manual testing, and mobile testing. I've listed 3 different automated tools here, and they're all free. The Wave Accessibility tool allows you to evaluate web content for accessibility issues directly within a browser, and it's an extension that works for Chrome, Firefox, and Microsoft Edge. If a web page is run through, it'll then flag errors. Once the error pops up, it'll create a pretty robust report indicating what the error means, why it matters, and what to do to fix it, and the standards and guidelines that it's referencing. PDF Accessibility Checker is a free tool to test the accessibility of PDF files. It's for Windows only. If a PDF starts as a Word document and is then transformed into a PDF, you can actually address the issues through Word prior to creating the PDF. And you can also check PDF accessibility issues if you have access to Adobe Acrobat Pro DC. The contrast checker by WebAIM includes color contrast sliders to adjust color for sufficient contrast checking. Manual testing is a great use in conjunction with automated tools because it can evaluate web content in ways that automated tools may not be able to address. You'll want to read through your content with accessibility best practices in mind, and a lot of these best practices are what we've covered today. So keep them in mind when you create content and when you review your content. Keyboard testing can help identify if all the interactive elements of a web page can be selected and activated through using a keyboard. It will help you identify mouse-only content, whether or not the navigation order is logical and intuitive, if there is a presence of a skip navigation link, and you will be able to determine whether or not you can navigate and close out of the web page with the keyboard testing as well. Screen reader testing can help identify reading order, spelling, dynamic content, form elements, table markup, image alt text, and navigation issues. Screen readers are another way to discover accessibility issues as part of the content review. Spelling mistakes can become obvious when you hear the words mispronounced by a screen reader. Screen readers are also very good for checking the accuracy and quality of image text alternatives, and can also help you identify problems with the reading order, table markup, and form elements. It will give a different perspective on the content, and you'll be able to uncover issues that you might not have otherwise been able to discover. And here are some of the resources that I used to create this web presentation. And if you go to Google and type accessibility and whatever you'd like to know about web page creating content, such as like tables, and then you also type .edu, you'll find a ton of resources online and all of the accessibility tips and tricks you need to know for keeping in mind when you're creating accessible content for a website. So now the presentation is done and we're going to go on to questions. It looks like we have some from the chat. Let's see. Oh, thank you for correcting my slide. Can the presentation slides be shared with the participants after the webinar? Yep, I believe they are going to be shared after the webinar. Will there be a handout? The slides will be the handout. I can also include other additional links in a separate slide that I did not mention in the resource slide, but were helpful for the rest of the presentation. Let's see. Oh, the hover over change is not showing up. Oh, okay. The alt text is not shown in Zoom. Okay. Any comments on the accessibility testing tools from UserWay versus AIM? Nope, I have no comments on either. So you can use either and figure out what works best for your web content and your situation. Let's see. Can you please explain again why images shouldn't be used as links? Yeah, so images in general shouldn't be used as links if there is a better alternative to use, such as like a descriptive link text. It's easier for a user to navigate through a web page with descriptive link text as opposed to an image, unless the image in use is intuitive or there is surrounding context, and additionally image alt text that provides context for why the image link is used. So for example, if you were going to navigate to a separate web page within your website, for example, like a workshops web page, a descriptive link with the link title, workshops would be more intuitive as a link than if your image link was just of a classroom with a bunch of children sitting in it. Without additional context, that image of a classroom with children sitting in it might not be helpful for a user to understand where that link is taking them to. Also, it may be difficult depending on how you use that image in your web page for a user to identify that that image is actually a link as opposed to just a image that's nested in the web page. Let's see, are there free and affordable screen readers that you'd recommend? A screen reader, there's a screen reader that I think that Google has that's like a browser extension that you can use. I believe that's free. And also one of the more popular screen readers is JAWS. Let's see. Will there be any follow-up webinars that focus on hands-on approaches to smaller chunks of what you've covered today? It would help to have some practical focus. That's a DHPSNY question that I can't answer. Let's see, how much more time? Oh, okay, we have like 12 minutes. There are a lot of messages. Thinking about the site like First Dibs that rely on images to click through. Okay. Let's see, Jessica writes, it's hard for a small institution to make these things happen without a dedicated website person. Yeah, that can be true. But it's sort of as long as you can acknowledge that some of these things need to be done and you sort of head into the direction of being able to start using some of these practices, your website will be much more usable and much more user-friendly. See, from a litigation standpoint, how much accessibility is enough? It seems there's always another group that desires something catering to their limitations. I can't really speak from a litigation standpoint, but if you focus on usability and accessibility practices in your web and content design, you will have a much more satisfying user experience for your website. Let's see. Ariana writes, iPhones also have screen reading capabilities, which may be imperfect, but are useful tools for accessibility checking. Thank you, Ariana. That's a really good point. Jessica writes, thank you for this. Looking forward to saving all the links for use. Thank you. Let's see. Jack wrote, I was under the impression that we should be using a website's full address and that would make it, and that would be making clear web. I'm going to start this again. I was under the impression that we should be using a website's full address and that we should be making web addresses clear. Visit and contact us here rather than have a link. Visit here to contact us. This lets people know if they're going to a different website or staying within the same site. Also, thanks. I also use the NVDA for a screen reader. It's best practice to have the descriptive link be to the page title as opposed to the full URL address, because it'll be easier to read as a destination for users. Users will understand the page title much easier than the URL. Also, if a screen reader is being used and it's reading through that link text, it's going to identify the descriptive link text that's used and the URL that's used at the same time. So for example, if your descriptive link text is the URL, the screen reader will read the URL twice in that scenario instead of visit our contact page, and then it will also read out the destination URL for that contact page, if that makes sense. Are there, okay, let's see. How often should one recheck a website? Does it just depend on how often you're making changes? Yeah, it kind of depends on how often you're making changes. If you like regularly make changes, you should probably have some sort of a schedule to maintain your website's accessibility or usability. Or another way to do it is as you are creating content for your website before you publish it, you should identify, or you can identify whether or not the content is accessible prior to publishing. It just depends on how you want to incorporate those practices within your own organization or web content creation workflows. Are there any other questions in the last 7 minutes? Oh, thank you. Oh, Susie was unable to join until right now. Will the replay be available? Yes, there will be a recording available of this at some point. I don't know what DHPSNY's timelines are for getting recorded webinars available online through their YouTube channel, but the slides will also be available as well. Let's see. Christopher writes, what is a good source for info on ADA liability for websites? I do not have an answer for that, but I can do a little bit of research and possibly include a couple of links in a slides resource page for that for all attendees. How do we access the slides from today? That is a DHPSNY question. I assume DHPSNY will be sending them out to folks who have registered. DHPSNY can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Let's see.
We'll
Brendan,
be sending, oh, sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
Yes, we'll be sending out the recording and the slideshow to all participants within the next week.
Okay, Brendan asks, you mentioned that although images shouldn't be used as a link, in cases when they are to be used, the alt text as a description of where the link goes, not as a description of the image, wouldn't an ARIA label assigned to the hyperlink be a better solution to then still have the descriptive image alt text? You'd want to identify it in both. The alt text should focus on the purpose of the image that's used in the content, purpose of the image used in the context of the web page rather than as specifically describing the content of the image that might function differently than the purpose of the image on the website, especially if it's a link. I believe in the resources I mentioned in that link slide, the University of Michigan's image slides and then image link slides are really good at explaining this way better than I am. So I would suggest looking towards that resource to like really get a fully fleshed out answer for that. Okay, looks like we have 3 minutes left now. Are there any like last 1 or 2 questions, or is there any sort of round up and close out that DHPSNY needs to do in the next like 2 minutes? Thank you for all of the feedback, everyone. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Our next webinar is Stories from the Field, Oral Histories at Queen's Memory Project on Wednesday, May 4th. And we invite everyone to attend. As always, it is free. Yeah, and thanks again for everyone for coming.